Thanks for joining us this morning. I am Jaco de Wet. We're going to be covering a couple of things today. The emergence of AI generative content, just kind of a little precursor as to why or what's happening. And then leaning a little more into the AI-powered chatbots, understanding like where conversational commerce comes in, real-world examples of AI personalized websites, where maybe executions that we thought was interesting to kind of showcase to you guys, and then just a couple of tips as to how you can get started with generative AI on your website. But yeah, a little bit about me. I've been working as a user experience designer for a little more than 14 years now. Started at private property, Nedbank, Standard Bank, a couple of fintechs, and then I'm currently a UX designer at Cloudsmiths, seconded to Dentsu in the UK, and I'm a certified usability analyst from Human Factors International. So a bit of experience. However, we're all quite new to this AI realm. And yeah, I had to kind of really put my thinking hat on to see what we can come up with. Fadi.
Just before we dive into the thing, our next webinar is how AI is changing the social media landscape. And we got Justine Nieuwenauber from Punky Starfish that runs the KFC social media account to come and talk to us next month. So if you're keen on that webinar, just follow the link in the chat and go and sign up to join us for that session. We're just going to talk about how the algorithms work in the feeds and the personalization of it, and how does the social media landscape look like at the moment with all the changes happening. Well, back to you, Jaco.
Thanks. And then yeah, just a side note, if at any point in time you feel like you would like to know more, if you want to know something a little more specific, please throw it in the chat, put your hand up, poke Fadi, whatever you. We'll see what we can do. And if we don't know the answer straight away, we can always have a little chat afterwards and see what we can come up with. So I think in terms of actual generative AI, it's something that we're all starting to be really familiar with. Like even my mother-in-law understands the concept of ChatGPT, and she's been using it to my dismay. But I think one of the things that, despite its unbelievable power, it's starting to show some of the cracks as to what it's coming up with. It definitely starts to lack originality. I think we've seen that debate going around quite a bit. If you don't provide it with enough information, you get a very broad spectrum message or broad version of something that you're looking for, meaning that you're not really honing in your content to audiences. And I think when it starts having that kind of generic feel to it, it's not in your own words. And it's almost, we can almost start saying that not using generative AI becomes the competitive advantage, sorry. Because the originality is starting to lack and showing through. And this is a very classic example of it. Although the idea is quite original, the content is still not. This is a guy that built a website using articles from New York Times, and he submits it to ChatGPT and says, rewrite this article set in the tone of The Onion 100 years in the future, and kind of assess what would the outcome be of whatever the topic was that was featured on the New York Times. So it's obviously quite quirky. It's very satirical, tongue-in-cheek. It's not meant to be serious. What I did think was amazing was someone managed to do this. He's actually has the entire code base is available to you to download, and you can do whatever you want with it. But this is really kind of what it's come down to, right? making websites that means absolutely nothing. It's not really contributing that much to the world. However, it would be seriously funny if one of these articles actually become a reality. I think what we need to look at, though, is the potential this holds. The same could be said for image generation. We've all played around with Dolly, Midjourney, trying to kind of figure out, like, how do I actually make this useful to me? One of the items that we're struggling with, even in our own world, is creating something that truly feels original, but also relevant, and then having that kind of inconsistency. And if you starting to try and build a theme of images that you can use throughout your website or your marketing artifacts, it's really difficult, because I mean, a lot of brand building is based on the fact that you have a consistent experience, a good user experience that the user can expect from your brand or your messaging. So even though it's still amazing and it's generating something truly remarkable and would have taken ages to generate otherwise, yeah, it's starting to show the cracks. And this is really creepy and interesting at the same time. It's a website called This Person Does Not Exist. The actual, I think, .com domain just shows an image of a person, and it's generated every 2 seconds. And what they're trying to prove is how realistic they can actually generate human faces that actually do not exist. So these are all modeled from with a technology stack called StyleGAN 3. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. But this is, I think, the worrying bit here is not so much the fact that probably sometimes they look a little squint or anything, but more along the lines of, how do we know what to trust in future? So when you put a testimonial in front of someone, how do I understand or kind of see the truth in what is being delivered? And I think these kind of questions is probably a little harder to answer right now, but hopefully in the future we'll start seeing those kind of patterns emerge from it, and we can start following those guidelines. And I think a lot of these companies are working really hard to establish those measures and protocols that would help guide us. So one of the things that we found really useful are chatbots, and especially AI-powered chatbots. And you'll see why we've kind of leaned into this a little, just to kind of understand the difference between what a regular chatbot is and what a artificial intelligence-powered chatbot would be. This table will be available to you in the deck once we actually publish it. But just 3 things that I would like to focus on: the technology stack, the responses, and the learning ability differences between these two. So the regular chatbots are quite rule-based. So in other words, it has a certain number of questions you can ask it, and we can have an algorithm that determines what the answer should be. But it's very limited in its program, because it's quite programmatically responsive. So it only says what it knows it should tell you. It can't determine for itself what it should be able to tell you. Whereas the AI-powered chatbot can actually learn from the questions, and it can adapt responses. So it's very dynamic, and something that it may not have been be able to answer yesterday, it can answer tomorrow, based on having more access to more information, etc. But the regular chatbots, you'd need to program those responses. And if you've ever used, not to diss anyone in particular, but like, I know I'm quite familiar with certain of the banking chatbots or medical schemes, and they are infuriatingly frustrating, because if you don't ask the right question, it just simply can't answer you. So we've seen the emergence of AI-generated or AI chatbots in a number of spaces. The first is in customer services or customer service delivery. Google has a platform called Dialogflow, which enables people to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, more easily be able to kind of train models and allow users to ingest information and then have like quite an interesting experience accessing that data for users using kind of text or speech, etc. I've got a video here that I'm going to play back to you. It's about 2 minutes. What I would like you to kind of see what they've kind of got leaned into is they've taken an owner's manual of a car, and it allowed a person in trouble to kind of submit this issue to them. This is a demo. And there's something happening, I can tell you who you are and what's happening. You can actually translate that from your preferred language potentially. And then it's starting to kind of also telling the user or asking them, are you in a position where you can do something? So there are like safety protocols baked into the responses as well, because they're going to ask the user to do something that requires them to kind of have like take their attention off the road, etc. It's quite expensive. But what later on starts happening is once they've actually discovered what the problem is and how the solution would necessarily need to be resolved, they're able to kind of direct the user and connect with other services. So like mapping services. So here's another example where they use voice and the voice responses. So like if their hands are occupied, otherwise you can actually start engaging with the user on with different media.
Turn the car back on and see if things are working.
And this looks quite futuristic, but I'm actually have another example where this is quite local. What's happening now is that they can actually start telling the user, okay, cool, what do you want to do? The user saying, I want to do something in my office. They can actually affirm certain information that they already have about the user and then direct them to the personalisation to resolve the issue. So again, this seems very hypothetical, and this is obviously like quite a very slick demo on a video, but the reality is that it exists. It's not that far off. Another example that we found was Zendesk, which has got it baked into its support chat facility, where there are certain queues. Sorry, this thing is supposed to loop, but what I want to pause on is there's an entity that it connected to. It probably don't even have to supply that much information, and it would actually be able to kind of understand what you're trying to say and then provide you with the necessary information. Again, sometimes it feels quite like, yeah, this is too futuristic, but I can promise you it's not. And this is where I would like to lean in. Fadi dared me to do a live demo, but I refrained. So I opted for screenshots. Sorry, Fadi. So Jenny Internet is internet service provider in South Africa that offers kind of point-to-point internet connectivity. So they specialize a lot in kind of platteland areas or small towns where people don't necessarily have access to fiber, so they can do fixed Wi-Fi or wireless connectivity. So I prompted Jenny and I said, hey, like I'm moving soon to a new address. What are my options? And like, can I check if they access? Seems pretty straightforward question and response. It prompted me to ask me what my address is. And I was spiteful and I only entered my street address to see what it does with it. It could obviously determine that, hey, like I need a bit more information. Tell me what town you live in. And I just gave it my suburb or like my town. From there, it managed to determine that I'm X kilometers away from it. Here are my options for connectivity. And then, it's quite lengthy in copy. So I think, there's a little bit of work to be done. But I was quite familiar with this because, if you have a parent like mine, they send you articles instead of shorter messages. But what I then did is I prompted it with a question that I don't think would necessarily have been programmed before. So this is now where the AI starts to actually kind of really be powerful. So I asked it, like, don't they have any fiber options? And their response, no, they don't have any. They explain what they have. And then I went back. So without providing any context, I then went back to say, okay, cool, if I want to consider, like, use their services, how do I plan for this? Like, I'm moving on the 1st of June. And it was able to craft a response that made me feel like quite good. It said, like, applying at least 2 to 3 weeks before you move in. So your date on the 1st of June would be perfect. Now, if that, to me, programmatically, you would never have been able to kind of determine that type of response. Only AI would really be able to kind of take that information, digest it in a way, and then craft a message back to you that would make sense and you would be able to kind of connect with. And this is critical. This is really interesting, where that starts heading home. Then I asked it via voice note, what would the installation fees be? And it started, like, doing a little breakdown on that. And then finally, I just said, no, it's okay, I don't want anything, but please can you forward the prices to my email address? That's all I asked it to do. And it actually sent me a quote with the information that I asked it. It's included my location details, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is a really good experience. This was suitably one of the better experiences I've had, probably surfing any type of service provider for internet. And the reason I feel that it's so useful was because I did not have to, one, go and look for all this information. I was able to do this 7 o'clock last night. I was able to be rude and short on my messaging, and it continued being super courteous. And I was able to kind of ask it what I want, rather than having to sift through a website, all the FAQs, all the pricing information, et cetera, et cetera. I could be very prompt with what I want to know, and it was able to ingest and respond accordingly. So two observations, or a couple of observations, is that you need data. Unfortunately, these kind of services aren't available to you just starting a chatbot, for example. You need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row when you actually start contributing to these models to learn from. The key aspects that I thought was really interesting was also it's quite repetitive tasks or certain things that I want out of it. So, like, you know, like having a flight code or knowing where I live. So there are certain inputs that you need to kind of be able to kind of cater to and then respond to as well. So there's slightly more than just, say, your knowledge base that you'd need to import. It would be an amalgamation of quite a lot of data points that you would need to kind of contribute with. And it's mainly useful in kind of support-oriented tasks and for sales purposes, and especially because you can run these models or these kind of bots outside of working hours, or maybe even when your call center is at capacity. You know, there are quite a number of ways that this really is super useful.
So, any questions around these chatbots and what Jaco is seeing? You're welcome to ask it, or just type it in the text.
Or if you have your own observation, it would be interesting to share that as well. Sorry, I didn't see the mute part.
It's okay, Jaco. Just continue.
Cool. So the reason this actual webinar even sparked a conversation was I came across an article written by Jacob Nielsen. He's one of the founding members of Nielsen Norman Group. He's been in the industry for decades, and he's quite a pioneering research usability engineer. And he's really kind of set a lot of the foundations that we use today around heuristics and principles that will forever probably be used in user experience design and otherwise. And he wrote an article that asked the question, like, have we failed making the internet a better place for people with certain disabilities? So that would be typically be referred to as accessibility on the net. And his answer is yes. Like, I mean, so his measures for success of a website would, how easy is it for a website to be, for someone to actually learn what they are doing? How productive would the person be trying to fulfill a certain task? And what is the experience? How enjoyable would the website be? And I think to a large degree, we won't even, like, if you're able-bodied, you would not even necessarily be able to check all these boxes on quite a number of websites at the moment. So he said, and I quote, "I consider users with disabilities to be simply users." So I started thinking, like, well, what if users with disabilities, if users with disabilities are simply users, what if we look at all users who has an inability to do certain things? So not necessarily speaking to accessibility standards or high contrast things, like there are a whole host of things that you can cast under the accessibility net. But what if the users that you're trying to target has an inability to do something based on their ability to kind of consume or understand or have reference or have mental models that relate to the content that you're trying to actually put out there? So that then kind of, I was starting to think, well, maybe we need to consider that it's not necessarily making bigger and better websites, but making what you have on the websites more understandable and more consumable. So personalization is a big aspect to it. And I found two examples that I thought was kind of really interesting. On SurveyMonkey, obviously you fill out a whole host of things when you sign up. And with their latest AI tool, you can actually build surveys really at the click of a button. So they used a Azure OpenAI service. And obviously they have a huge amount of data to lean into. So you can click on literally, I want to do market research, and it populates this little text box over here saying like what it is that you're looking to actually research. And it would build from text, it would build you an entire survey, and then you can start manipulating that survey to kind of better suit what you're looking to do. What was interesting is how it automatically started including things like, I want demographic information, and it already defined what some of those demographic information elements would be. You can probably even start defining, like, you can actually define the goals as well. So what is it that you want to know from the actual survey? And it'll prompt the users with the questions that you may not necessarily even have had thought about to get to the goal that you're aiming for. Another example of dynamic or personalized content that you may not even be aware of is on Netflix. So you may have noticed that they have random thumbnails, but the reality is that those thumbnails are not random by any chance. They have probably one of the biggest catalogs of TV and film on the net, and especially in South Africa, I suppose. And they've gone through huge efforts to try and draw users' attention to particular TV series, etc. So just to kind of show you, there's an entire article that unpacks exactly what happens in the back end and how they actually managed to do this. But this is like one of the examples that they gave where if someone watched romantic movies interested in Good Will Hunting, they'll show like a frame where Matt Damon and Minnie Driver are leaning into a kiss or like within a romantic moment. So it managed to detect that your pattern of browsing, and it also managed to detect a frame that speaks to romantic behavior. And it matched those two things and gave you a thumbnail that is most likely for you to click on. Then the second example was someone who might be quite interested in comedies with male leads, etc. And that would then, they realized, okay, cool, well, Robin Williams is a comedic actor and people recognize him for that. Therefore, they use a frame with Robin Williams, which is most likely going to be the reason why you click on it. Not that Mini Driver is not funny, I suppose, in their own right, but like the reality is that's how they've kind of manipulated, or not manipulated, but personalized the information. So these are very extreme examples, but I think what I would like you to do is consider, when doing this for yourself, don't jump on the bandwagon without giving it some thought. I think it is very new technology. Like you say, most of the people that actually came onto the call mentioned that they're interested in this new thing, or they're interested in generative AI because it's quite fresh. And I think what we need to do is dip our toes into the water rather than jumping in altogether. So being slightly more strategic about it, like have an approach, like try and like define the framework that you want to work with. And in the user experience design world, we would, typically follow a user-centered design protocols or methodologies that would help us kind of take us through the process instead of just doing something. So in short, I think focus your efforts where the users are struggling most. So find out where people are like having an issue converting, and don't necessarily just go to the source of where the users are, but maybe look at the entire journey, and look into your call center data, look at your FAQs, look at your analytics, play back some user journeys. There's some great tools out there that would actually do full-on recordings of user patterns. And I can promise you can watch 10 videos and you'd start seeing or recognizing certain patterns. And if you know a certain page is being a problem, then hone in on that page. But don't forget the fact that it's a journey. So if you're missing something along the journey, that might be the reason why people drop off at a certain point as well. The second thing is, when coming up with a solution, like make sure that you're not trying to always reinvent the wheel. Sometimes there's comfort or familiarity with certain things. So look at what patterns you could jumpstart from, and then see how you would, be a bit more, differentiate yourself a little more. But don't necessarily try and always be cutting edge, because there are reasons why patterns exist, but you can build on top of those patterns. Don't ignore those patterns and problems that have already been solved before. And over time, we already actually, like within my current workplace, they started looking at just certain of the AI patterns, but maybe more from a UI perspective. But I think we'll see more and more patterns emerge as these platforms start expanding, and we can already start seeing more and more documentation actually emerging from your Geminis and ChatGPTs as well. And then lastly, once you've implemented your solution, don't leave it. Like, review it. Make sure that the hypothesis or the plan you had is executed. And if it isn't working, be willing to pivot and move and like tweak it, like continuously test and move forward with what you kind of set out to achieve. If you're looking at your website specifically, I've broken it up into 3 major parts. I think you need to consider the fact that the user needs to move from point A to point B. So look at your call to actions on a website, areas where there are complex decision making. Like if you posing 10 options to a user, that's implying a complex decision making point. So like those are the typical areas that you can focus on to maybe improve the experience. And then also looking at user preferences, allowing users to kind of filter elements and enabling them to kind of have a more pleasant experience, things that they can relate to, things that they can see that appeals to them. That's all part of that user journey. Then content, we know that websites are mainly built from text, video, and images, but make sure that you have the right piece of content at the right point in time. So complex matters might actually be better communicated via video or audio, along with some visual style as well. So text generally can be quite overwhelming. Try and look at making text more concise, to the point, scannable, all of those kind of things that relates to the content on the website, anything that would communicate back to the user. And then visual design, lastly, is not necessarily what we would just imagine as our images or like graphic design, but the accessibility of it. Is the contrast of my text on my buttons high enough? Am I using too red, therefore my red button is like completely going missing within the page? So all of those kind of things speaks to visual design, so accessibility standards, visual hierarchy, and relevancy, making sure that it all is cohesive. And these three things together really amalgamates and would kind of advance your user experience if you actually have it deep diving into these three elements. This might seem cocky, but like, park your ego. I know how sentimental we can be about a 2-year project, launching something, and then someone comes along and tells you that you've screwed up your visual hierarchy, we need to do all of it again. Please don't get too attached to it. The idea is that you forever need to be able to change and pivot and understand that what might have been true 2 years ago is no longer true anymore, or that users have evolved, they've been exposed to better, and that you need to move along with that as well. So one of the things that we definitely need to kind of lean into is user-centric copy. I think a lot of the times, especially with generative AI, we run the risk of just creating, but we're not refining. I just, maybe before I lean into that, is there any other questions or anything people want to know?
I think I just want to mention to everybody on the call. So what Jaco, we are in the practical section now. We're going to explain what to practically do with in terms of AI and UX. So this is the most important section. But I think just to reiterate what Jaco was just saying earlier was, it's very important to decide where to apply the stuff we're going to show you now, because if you just, there's lots of AI tools and it's incredibly complicated space at the moment. So, and I think just two things that I picked up was, one is understand where there is a problem, don't go and fix something that's not a problem. That's the first one. And secondly, it's about the users, not about us or AI. AI is a feature, it's not a benefit. So the user, and taking a user-centric approach to AI is incredibly important. Otherwise, you're just going to waste your time with new shiny thing. So we've got 5 tips of 5 or 6 things that Jaco is going to recommend that you look at the website starting now.
Cool. So I think, yeah, like Fadi is saying, it's an assistant. AI should be able to assist you to get to where you need to be. I don't think it should be the core of what you're trying to achieve. One of the tools that I use extensively, because English is a second language and I'm not always the best copywriter, but creating content that engages was, and I'm not a copywriter by no means, but having used Hemingway, it's taught me a lot about how to really distill the message that you're trying to communicate. So if you don't know what Hemingway is, it's a tool that really kind of helps you to kind of refine what you're trying to say. What they do, though, is they use an automated readability index that determines on a US grade level what the readability of your content is. So you can see here on the right-hand side, it's stating that this copy I used from, I think it was Wikipedia about Fallout, the TV series. And you can see it's just like red. So what it's telling me on the right-hand side here is that 5 of the 6 sentences are very hard to read. So the one sentence not hard to read is Nolan directed the first 3 episodes. It's currently graded at a grade 15 reading level, and you need to aim for a grade 9 level of reading, which I suppose there are some guidelines as to how to do it, but the AI can help you do this and achieve what you're looking out to or setting out to do. So when I hovered over it, it said the sentence too long and complex, and then it asked me to fix it. And then in the suggestion, I mean, the only thing it really did to fix it was break up the sentences, and it also gave the sentence slightly more context. So like based on the role playing. So based on the role, it's assuming you understand what you're talking about, where it just added this little bit of text here to say the show is based on the role playing game. So minute changes the readability score by 6 grades, 7, I suppose, which is insane. And it's not something that you, as maybe a professional copywriter or, you know, like a scientist or marketing specialist would have considered necessarily to do at the time of writing this. But using tools like that would really kind of help us to be a bit more precise and a bit more guided as to what we're trying to achieve. The one thing I read, which was really interesting, was even though I'm able to read at a grade 15 level, doesn't necessarily mean that I should. Sometimes people are scanning content and are already consumed and already have worldly stressors that doesn't allow me to have the cognitive capabilities of consuming the content that you put out there. So if you're working with a high-end brand, or if you're working with, you know, super intellectual people, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should speak to them in that way either, because they already have a cognitive load just living. And that sometimes it's a relief seeing something that is easy to read. So that's just also something to consider. Like we, you know, when we start looking at segmenting audiences and like, it's okay, these people can read at a high level, it doesn't necessarily mean that they should. So it's just like a takeaway that I actually doing some of this work. In the support chatbot arena, what was interesting is there are quite a number of players within this field. I looked into, delved a little deeper into this one. I lost the name now, but what they have done is they've actually integrated into multiple chatting platforms that allows you to ingest your content into a centralized space. And that allows you to then have any chatting capability across multiple environments, which I thought was really interesting. What I did like discover though, was your tolerance for longer messages on WhatsApp versus a web chat. And that is something to consider, that depending on the channel, the user might expect a different experience. So we started experimenting a bit with WhatsApp, with NightJarr, and with reasonable feedback so far. But I think the consideration here is that you can reach quite a large audience with a tool like WhatsApp. Again, I think if you look at your market that you speak to, and especially in South Africa, the adoption of WhatsApp is massive versus maybe some of the other technologies or platforms. You have quite an age range that is able to send voice notes, take photos, and engage with you continuously versus maybe a web bot or maybe even one of the other Meta products. I think WhatsApp is an incredibly powerful tool that we should probably consider more as a mechanism to integrate AI chatbots with. And it would seem that the tool sets have matured enough for us to kind of look at that as more of a solution, more so than we probably would have done a year or two ago. Images. So we've looked at the AI generated images, and like I said, Midjourney and Dolly are really good examples. I think the one thing that we've learned from, say, something like Midjourney is also allowing you to kind of tweak the information and maybe try and create a slightly more consistent experience. This was an example where someone asked it to create a photo of a hipster working in a trendy coffee shop. Now, I think it's pretty spot on. The beanie is an interesting choice in all the hipsters, I suppose. But I think what Midjourney does allow you to do, which is really cool, is obviously the editing capabilities. This is all done through, I think, Discord. But then Fadi shared this thing with me where they allow you to personalize an appearance with a tool called Style Tuner. And you can actually continuously tune into a style choice that you like, and you can save that and apply that stylistic choice then into future projects. So that consistency issue that we discussed at the beginning of this session, that is something that they started obviously realizing as well, and allowing you to then kind of almost create a template for what it is that you're trying to do, I think is really interesting. And that's something that maybe, you should look into when looking at generative images or AI generated images. Another tool that I found was Use Galileo. And this speaks a little to the visual design, where someone asked the user asked the platform, like, create a landing page for a coffee shop in San Francisco as has a Euro image with sections including featured coffee, best-selling beans, and popular breakfast. What I thought was scary and unnerving was that it generated the designs and offered the user the Figma files to the actual designs. Now, I mean, if you've ever had to design something in Figma, and you're like me, I love using templates and then kind of adjusting them to suit my need. But if you can actually query the platform to generate exactly what it is that you're looking for, the amount of tweaking required subsequently becomes really minimal. And what would probably be running in the background as well, and you'll notice that, is they would start baking in some of that visual design hierarchy elements that I already spoke to you about now. They've included titles, they've included font hierarchies, they've included clear sections that would allow the user to understand what they're looking at. They've created high contrasting buttons. There are certain principles now baked into this design. You didn't ask for any of that. You just asked for a design. And they've given you something that's already practically very usable, maybe even more so than what you've been able to come up with to start with. And then they continue with, I like the second design more. Can you add it like a landing page, etc., or a subscription page? So you can continue within context, asking it questions and building pages out with the preferences that you've now already defined, which I thought was incredibly powerful. And it's a massive time saver. So consider using tools like this to jumpstart your website building again, or looking at, how do I take my website further? Maybe it's not even about rebuilding your website according to this design. Maybe it's just finding inspiration from designs that you can build using these platforms and applying it to your existing website. So I wouldn't necessarily always throw things out. Just using some form of inspiration often leads to a better experience that you can then offer on your own platform. Before I continue, I think Fadi, do you want to interject
Yeah.
quickly?
So I know. So this webinar is to empower everybody to do the stuff yourself. If you get stuck with anything, we want to make it easy to work with us. We offer these 10-hour or 20-hour packages to sort of just help you with digital marketing, including this AI. If you just want to give us a go, like just try us out, just go to the next slide, Yaku. There's for anybody that's attended this session, we've got a 3-hour trial where we can just help you to deploy some of the stuff, give you some UX recommendations, or maybe help you with Google Ads, or help you with SEO. So I'm gonna include a link in the chat now. So if you're interested to take us up on those free 3 hours, you're welcome to do so. Back to you, Yaku.
Cool. So dynamic content generation, the only example, not the only example, but like one of the examples that I considered was really useful. We currently have the transcripts of our webinars on the website as well. Obviously, there's certain screen readers, SEO benefits, all of those kind of things. What I did is I actually pulled that transcript into Gemini and asked it to summarize the entire webinar in a couple of points. And it did so quite accurately and with a lot of grace. Consider the amount of time it would have taken to kind of condense all of that information into like a summarized version, or having someone to sit through and try and like concentrate on some of the highlights within that session. This is an example where dynamic content is quote unquote used, but it's allowing you to take something and make something better out of it. You can probably automate some of this capability, but this is just an example where I did it manually, but like the APIs and the tool sets would probably be available for you to actually query Gemini asking it, except you wouldn't necessarily have editing control over it. You would need to kind of then just accept what it's spitting out, which I wouldn't necessarily, again, recommend. I would try and refine it and then make sure that it's targeting and meeting the audience requirements that you're trying to aim for. Visual and audio enhancements. So I think it's quite a interesting topic, because I believe that whatever we put out there already has to some extent already been solved sometimes. So even if I looked at connecting text-to-speech capability within my website, that may be completely unnecessary. All I need to ensure is that my website abides to the, say, typical SEO schemas. Those SEO schemas really are blueprints for quite a number of platforms that would try and consume your website. So it's not unique to Google to obviously use those schemas, but your JAWS, which is used by blind people to kind of consume websites, make use of all of those prescribed tagging requirements that Google is saying you should do for good SEO, when in reality, Google asked you to do that because it makes it a better user experience for people with, say, certain disabilities. High contrasting things, not hiding things, making it easier for people to access stuff on mobile versus desktop. All of those requirements aren't there for better SEO. It's actually for better user experiences, and it's rewarding you with SEO because you're offering a better user experience. What you would do is, if you abide by these rules, is that it will future-proof your website. It will make sure that whatever chat mechanisms are out there that potentially can crawl your website to understand what it is that you're doing, you would have given it the right definitions, and it would be able to understand the information that you're providing it, and it'll be able to respond if you have to query that information that it managed to consume.
Jaco, I just want to explain in English what this means. So what Jaco is saying is, if you apply schema, which is just this way to format the code on your website, Google and Microsoft Bing would be able to access the information better. It would give, it would help it understand it better. Why it's important is because then you can start ranking inside ChatGPT. So if somebody types in best medical aid gap cover, then it will start ranking inside ChatGPT, which is going to happen more and more and more. So you can hit two flies with one hit, where the schema is better for users and usability, and there's the added benefit of increased visibility and exposure on these chatbots and ChatGPT.
So social platforms would also make use of some of these tagging capabilities, and it's able to better interpret the information that you're then kind of giving it as well. How you can actually provide a better experience using product and service design with AI. The only example I could really come up with is, again, going back to some of the design tools that would enable me to build a website or to kind of create a better experience. And this speaks to that kind of journey aspect that I referred to, if you remember, the journey, the kind of content, and then also the visual design. FigJam is if you're familiar with Miro, and I think there are quite a number of these kind of sketch platforms, if I can put it that way. They've implemented a generative tool set that allows me to kind of query it, and it would actually be able to render something that I could then use as a jumping off point. Instead of using a template, which is usually just blank versions of a flow diagram or something, I could be really specific. So I said, map out a typical user journey from banner advert to lead form for someone who's looking to purchase an expensive holiday. And what was really interesting, and if you've had to do this, you would understand the amount of collaboration sometimes it requires to make sure that you've identified all the spots that there would be a positive or negative choice that the user would need to make. And how does that connect back to the flow? How do I take the user from point A to point B to point C and maybe back to point B? Having to consider, like, this is quite a lot of work that I short-circuited literally typing it out in less than a minute. And again, it's not to then go, okay, cool, now I've got my blueprint, I need to kind of run with this. No, the idea is that you actually use this as a jumping off point and you start tweaking it to accommodate for what you're trying to achieve. So I think in like my final remarks here is that you need to kind of be slightly more strategic and user focused when looking at these tool sets. It's not about the content generated, it's about, does this content, is it suitable for my users? And how do I use AI to better and make it more suitable for my users? So don't necessarily just apply ChatGPT into your website for whatever reason. Be slightly more strategic with it. Discover the user problem. So make sure that you are solving an actual problem and that you're not introducing new ones. So using tools like Microsoft Clarity or analytics data, make sure that you're actually, looking at those conversion points and optimizing and improving them, rather than, finding the problem somewhere else that you assume is the problem. And then, quite frankly, content sucks. Like having people read through reams and reams of content, there's simply no time for it. We don't have the space or the market for that anymore. People are quite used to short, consumable pieces of content. Make sure it's easy to consume, reduce the overload and the stressors that people are experiencing today already. And
Jaco,
yes.
can I just add on there? I want to challenge everybody on the call. Go to your website, take the homepage copy and cut and paste it into Hemingway. And I will guarantee you 90% of your content will be too complicated and it basically sucks. So if you just allocate 1 hour today and just go and do that, you are applying AI to your website that is a problem, and it is user-centric. So just go and do that today.
Yeah, I think it's unnerving and really humbling to do that, because you discover how much you probably did wrong to your users in the past.
Because Yoku, the problem is, like, we look at our own websites every single day, and you stop noticing the issues that you have on your own website.
It's almost embarrassingly so. I think the number of times you sometimes ask me, like, have you considered this? And I'm like, no, because I was so fixated on something else. And, like, you know, getting that perspective, using some of these tools to maybe highlight some of those elements to you is really kind of where you need to sit and kind of just embrace. And it's less about the technology and what the technology is doing for you, and maybe highlighting for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions from anybody? Okay, Melissa's got a question. How would you recommend balancing the need of content simplicity with recommended content length for web pages to rank in terms of SEO? Whew, that's a good question. You want to take it, Jaco, or should I?
I think the recommendation of SEO would inherently be, well, it depends on who the recommendation came from. If it was your agency, maybe question that. Maybe look at the source. Understand what could 300 words look like. How can you break it up into slightly more consumable pieces of content on the same page? Maybe using slightly more bullets with highlighted elements, create slightly more visual hierarchy on your pages, rather than just creating 10 paragraphs of copy. I think you need to be clever with the way you segment the pieces of content then to make it a better user experience. So breaking it up, making it shorter, highlighting the important bits, all of those are really kind of making it more simple. And then typically that would kind of bring you to the recommended length, in my experience.
Melissa, I'm gonna give you a slightly different angle. So I've been in SEO for 15 years now, and initially it was all SEO, and with length, and you have to use the keywords. And I've pivoted. I'm more in the favor of it being really good user copy, and even if it's shorter and bullet points. And one of the reasons is Google uses two signals to determine the quality of the content as well. So it's when you do a search on Google, let's say you type in medical aid cover and you click on the thing and you read it, and they leave immediately, like 3 minutes later or 3 seconds later, they click the back button. That's a signal to Google that this isn't good content. So even if it was like 300 words, like that's not good. And then the other thing is Google Analytics. Like, it gets that signal in terms of engagement on the page. So I have the correct 300 or 400 words with 3% keyword density. But if the users don't read the content, then like you get a bad quality signal. That's the first thing. And then secondly, 300 word doesn't convert. Like, if you have like really hard to read content, when we look at Microsoft Clarity data, people don't read anymore. They scan bullet points, like they don't read paragraphs. So I think the copy and the usability and the simplicity of the copy is more important than it for being good for SEO. So that's my view. Cool. We've run out of time. I'm going to stop the recording now, but you're welcome. We're going to spend another